89. As of November 29, 2012, 11:30 a.m., 89 is the confirmed number of Tibetans, number of people that have set themselves on fire inside Tibet, calling for freedom. Prime Minister Harper, my name is Yudin. I'm a Tibetan Canadian. And as my leader and as the person that represents Canada and its values, I urge you to step up for Tibet. I urge you to not sign the CNOC-Nexon deal because it'll have devastating effects on Tibetans. I urge you to be a leader not only in Canada but globally as well. And I urge you to not be a bystander, to not let their sacrifices be in vain. Prime Minister Harper, stand up for Tibet.
Dear Prime Minister Stephen Harper, my name is Jen Shimi. I'm Tibetan Canadian. Do you really know what is happening in Tibet right now? Since February 2009, there were 94 self-immolations in Tibet. 28 of them came in November alone. There are hundreds of reasons why they are self-immolating themselves. China illegally occupied Tibet in 1959. Since then, 1.2 million Tibetans have been killed. More than 6,000 monasteries have been demolished. Around 52 billion worth of natural resources being looted from Tibet. Kidnapping, imprisonment, torture, murder, all at People's Republic of China's own and will and term. No basic human rights in Tibet. No rights for language study, no freedom of movement and communication, no right of speech, dumping of nuclear waste, eradication of nomads, diversion of waterways, forced sterilization, and countless illegal enforcements. Tibetans want to live without fear in an independent nation, and the return of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama to Tibet. These are some of the reasons why Tibetans are burning. Lastly, I would like to suggest you not to sell Nexon to China because China National Offshore Oil Company is complicit in human rights abuses in Tibet, funding China's efforts to force millions of Tibetan nomads off their land to make way for mining and oil extraction. This policy is driving Tibetans to self-immolate in protest. Prime Minister Stephen Harper, I urge you to stand up for Tibet. Tibet's unique culture is endangered and we need your support. I hope one day Tibet will be free and His Holiness the Dalai Lama will return to Tibet. Just a little. Thank you.
My name is Rinchen Doma, and I am a Tibetan Canadian. As of this evening, I've just received news that the Harper government has approved the Nexon-Sihanouk deal. In the last 2 years alone, there have been 92 self-immolations, 28 in November. That's almost one for every single day in November. Someone self-immolated in Tibet, calling for a free Tibet and proving to the world that China's policies in Tibet are failing them. Now, as the Canadian government has approved this Nexon-Sihanouk deal, Prime Minister Harper, you have the duty to stand up for Tibet when we know that this is a time of great turmoil for the Tibetan people, when we know that the Chinese government is not accountable to their own people, let alone to Canadians and to Tibetans. I demand that you start a multilateral forum with like-minded governments around the world to resolve the issue in Tibet, to stop the self-immolations in Tibet, and to stand up for human rights. You need to be on the right side of history because a freer Tibet is a freer world.
My name is Judy Tetong. I live in Victoria, British Columbia. But 49 years ago, I was one of the very first Canadians to work with refugees from Tibet in the mountains of North India. I went on a one-year assignment with CUSO, the Canadian University Service Overseas, but the need was so great I ended up staying and working for 12 years in those Tibetan refugee camps. On my return home, I received the Order of Canada for my work there. Prime Minister Harper and Minister John Baird, I am appealing to you to take the lead in creating an international contact group to facilitate a coordinated response by Western governments to the unfolding crisis in Tibet. There have now been 92 self-immolations of monks, nuns, and lay people, some as young as 15 years old. Prime Minister Harper, can you imagine your own 16-year-old son, Ben, being desperate enough about the suffering of his people to set himself on fire? As a father, you can empathize with the agony of the families of those who have sacrificed their lives in Tibet. On your recent visit to China, I well remember the footage of you and Mrs. Harper with the cuddly baby panda bear. But you probably did not know that just over the mountains in Tibet, at that same time, an 18-year-old Tibetan schoolgirl had just set herself on fire. Mr. Harper, you are the Prime Minister who awarded honorary Canadian citizenship to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So we hope you will be the Prime Minister who inspires other world leaders to stand up for Tibet in this, its greatest hour of need. In the words of the Dalai Lama's good friend and fellow Nobel Peace Laureate, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, for goodness sake, if you want nonviolence to succeed, then help these people. Thank you.
My name is Karma Tinley Tomi, and I'm here for a few moments on behalf of Tibet and Tibetans everywhere. Mr. Prime Minister, as you know, Canada is a country that cherishes the ideals of freedom, democracy, and human rights for everyone. Well, as you know, Tibet and its Tibetan people do not have those rights. They are daily suppressed, oppressed, cultural genocide, physical genocide, tortured. Mr. Prime Minister, you were elected to be a leader. And I am here to ask you on behalf of those 80 plus self-immolations, on behalf of those who have been murdered by the Chinese occupiers. Mr. Prime Minister, please use your voice in the UN and on the international scene to speak for Tibet, to lobby for her freedom, independence, and let's see a free Tibet within our lifetime. Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. Tashi Dele.
Prime Minister Stephen Harper, my name is Tenzin Lobsang, and I'm a Tibetan Canadian. At this critical time for the two countries I call home, Canada and Tibet, you have the opportunity to stand up and say no more to China. As Canada is set to announce the decision on the Nexen-Chinook deal by December 10th, I urge you to not allow this dangerous deal to pass. By signing this deal, you are signing away the rights of Canadian citizens, workers, and our own government to protect itself against the Chinese Communist Party's interests. With this deal and that of FIPA, you are bringing Canada one step closer to becoming another Chinese colony. Tibetans inside Tibet already know what this means. The Chinese state-owned Chinook has had operations inside Tibet which coerced and forced the resettlement of Tibetan nomads off their lands for the Communist Party's interests, stealing away their very way of life and existence. This type of abusive leadership and disregard for human rights is why Tibetans inside Tibet are literally lighting themselves on fire for freedom. At least 90 Tibetans, 28 just in the last month, have set themselves on fire, seeing no other way to illustrate to the world their suffering under the Chinese government's brutal rule and illegal occupation. Shortly before you were elected as Prime Minister of Canada, I met you outside the Governor-General's residence. Chairman Hu Jintao was visiting Canada, and political and business leaders were meeting him at a dinner thrown at Rideau Hall. Outside the dinner, there were hordes of people protesting Hu Jintao. And instead of driving straight into Rideau Hall, like everyone else, you stopped to speak to us Canadians instead of ignoring us. A black-tinted window town car stopped right in front of us, and out you walked. You walked straight up to us, our small group of Tibetans, and said that when you went into the dinner to meet Hu Jintao, you would not forget about us Tibetans. So I'm asking you today, please don't forget about Tibet. Stand up for human rights, democracy, and religious freedom. Stand up for Canada, stand up for Tibet. And like that day that I first met you, please stop and listen to your citizens instead of driving straight into the arms of the Chinese government.
Hi, my name is Kate Wasno. I'm the International Director of Students for a Free Tibet. I'm making this video message today to Prime Minister Harper of Canada and to President Obama. As a Canadian living here in New York, my appeal is to both of you that you have to speak out now about the crisis in Tibet. You have to get together with other world leaders and figure out political solutions to end the current crisis. We're talking about 87 lives. 87 Tibetans have lit themselves on fire in protest to demand freedom, to demand a return of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, to demand human rights. And the shocking silence on your part. In the past month, there's been almost one self-immolation every day in Tibet, and you need to speak out now. You need to get together, and you need to help find diplomatic solutions for Tibet, and you can do this. And my message, I'll make sure that this gets to you.
Prime Minister Harper, this message is for you. 89 Tibetans in Tibet have self-immolated, calling for freedoms and basic human rights. Canada, as one of the biggest democracies in the world, needs to stand up for Tibet. We have the responsibility to make sure that this is not repeated. There is one way in which we can achieve this, we can solve this, is by forming a multilateral forum with a bunch of other like-minded countries and pressuring China to make sure that the issue is resolved once and for all. Prime Minister Harper, Tibet needs you now. This is your chance to make history.
Prime Minister Stephen Harper, my name is Tsering Lama. I'm a Tibetan Canadian and a graduate student at Columbia University. I'm recording this message and joining thousands of people around the world in urging their leaders to take swift and substantive action to end the crisis in Tibet. To date, over 90 Tibetans have self-immolated, 28 just in November. Clearly, this is a severe escalation of the crisis, and this is the next turn in the 50-year nonviolent movement. The Chinese government is not going to stop the repression. The Tibetan people will not stop fighting for freedom. The only way that this crisis can be resolved, and soon, is with people like you. I believe that you have a particularly important role to play in resolving this crisis. In the past few years, under your leadership, Canada has seen increased ties with the Chinese government. At the same time, I believe that you have shown true support for the Tibetan people. In 2007 and earlier this year, you met with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, despite warnings and threats by Chinese officials. I thank you for that. Earlier this year in February, you said that Canada will always be a vocal advocate for Tibet. That is also very important. Thank you. Now is the time for you to take the next level of action. I urge you to form a multilateral working group with other democratic nation leaders and join together to say, how can we pressure China to end this crisis and to solve the Tibet issue for once and all? This is your chance to show bold visionary leadership on a global stage. Tyrannical dictatorships are falling apart left and right, as we've seen in recent years, and it's only a matter of time before the Tibetan people have what is rightfully theirs, freedom and democracy and human rights. I urge you to stand on our side once more and in a most visionary way that you possibly can. This is your chance, and we need you. 6 million Tibetan people need you. Thank you.
My name is Sring Doma, and I am a Tibetan Canadian from Toronto. I am recording this message to call on Prime Minister Stephen Harper to break the silence on Tibet and to reject the Nixon-CNOOC deal. CNOOC is China's state-owned offshore oil corporation that is looking to take over Nexen, which is a Canadian oil company. CNOOC has been known to fund forced resettlement projects to drive Tibetan nomads off their ancestral lands to make way for mining explorations inside occupied Tibet. This bid comes at a time when an escalating number of 90 Tibetans have set themselves on fire, and a shocking number of 28 in just November alone, to show political defiance against the oppression that they face under China's rule. Many of these Tibetans who have set themselves on fire come from former nomadic communities who have been driven off their land. This deal is bad for Tibet, and this deal is also bad for Canada. This deal undermines our Canadian values for freedom, democracy, and peace. As a leader of a country that is known around the world as a peacekeeping nation, Prime Minister Harper, you have an important role to play. Not only do you have the power and the moral responsibility to end oppression inside Tibet, you also have the opportunity to champion human rights by first rejecting the Nixon-Sihanouk deal, and second, to call on other governments to form a multilateral action group for Tibet. Thank you.
Prime Minister Harper, I have a very important message for you today. By December the 10th, you will have decided whether or not to sell Canadian oil company Nexen to China. That day also happens to be International Human Rights Day, a day people celebrate around the world for the United Nations General Assembly's adoption and proclamation of Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In Tibet, however, just yesterday, Chinese authorities cracked down once again on peaceful protesters. This time, young Tibetan students who fought for their language, who resisted Chinese rule, and fought for rights and freedoms that we in Canada take for granted. We have a proud history of standing up for those in need, and we have a proud history of holding steadfast to our beliefs in justice, freedom, and human rights. I hope you will do what is expected of any great leader that has ever taken the reins in a free nation. Tibet needs you now, Prime Minister Harper, and with you rejecting the sale of this oil company, and by taking the lead in a multilateral forum for Tibet, we can truly bring about real change and a message of hope for everyone around the world, especially the high school students in Tibet, the nomads and farmers who have left everything behind to relay the Tibetan message, the monks and nuns who have burned their bodies in their sacred robes, to add another push to the ultimate struggle for freedom in Tibet. Tibet needs you now, Prime Minister Harper, and this is your opportunity to play an important role in changing the tide of world history.
My name is Lamuki, and I'm a Tibetan Canadian. Prime Minister Harper, I'm sure you're very well aware of the escalating crisis in Tibet. With the recent drastic wave of self-immolations reaching up to 95 since 2009, it is absolutely clear that the Tibetans inside Tibet can no longer remain suppressed under the brutal Chinese oppressive regime. They can no longer wait any further for freedom from China's rule. At such a time when Tibetans in Tibet are being denied from their basic human rights and are turning to such drastic acts of protest, and are in dire need of international support, Canada, a country that is known to be a strong advocate of human rights and democracy, remains silent. Right from the moment when the Harper government approved the takeover of Nexen by Chinese state-owned company, Canada became accountable for the repression in Tibet by funding for the destruction of more Tibetan lives. Canada, therefore, has more responsibility than ever to act for Tibet. I urge you to lead a government effort to resolve the escalating crisis in Tibet, and the only way Canada can truly impact the Chinese government is by forming a coordinated group with other countries that will help put an end to the self-immolations in Tibet. One cannot stress enough that Tibet needs Canada's support now more than ever. Canada must do this for democracy, and Canada must do it for basic human rights.
My name is Tenzin Hladin, and I'm a proud Tibetan Canadian living in Toronto. But recently, the decision made by you, Prime Minister Harper, to approve the Nexen takeover by China's national offshore company has made me very shameful to call myself a Canadian. Not only did my leader stay silent on the escalating crisis in Tibet, but through this Nexen-Sihanouk deal, Canada is now funding the destruction of Tibetan culture in Tibet. Prime Minister Harper, I urge you to pressure the Chinese government by initiating a multilateral action with government officials from different countries to stop China's human rights abuses in Tibet. Over 90 Tibetans have self-immolated, asking for basic human rights, and Canada has not shown any signs of concern. Instead, we are now part of cultural genocide and human rights abuses in Tibet. Please, Prime Minister Harper, talk Tibet before trade. stand up for human rights, and stand up for Tibet.
Dear Prime Minister Stephen Harper, my name is Tenzin Tara and I'm an 18-year-old Tibetan Canadian. On December 10th, 2012, on International Human Rights Day, I found out that you accepted the Nexon deal with China. This disappointed me greatly. As a young Canadian, this will affect my future as well as the future generations to come. By accepting the Nexon deal, you have made the decision to support the horrible treatment of the Tibetans inside Tibet. I am sure you're aware that the company that now owns one of Canada's largest resources is directly funding the resettlement of Tibetan nomads. We can see the resemblance in Canada's history with the treatment of the Aboriginal people of Canada, and it's very sad to see history repeat itself. This is a crucial time in the Tibetan cause. About 92 Tibetans have self-immolated while demanding for basic human rights and the return of His Holiness the Dalai Lama to his homeland. Most recently, a 17-year-old self-immolated for the Tibetan cause. As a young North American, I have had connections to young teenagers that have committed suicide because of bullying, and it saddens me that I have now witnessed my government support an international bully. So I'm praying that as an international leader, you will work together with like-minded governments and stand up for human rights and stand up for the Tibetan cause and stop fueling the fire Tibet is burning in.
My name is Tenzin Sindhu and I'm a Tibetan Canadian student living here in Toronto, Ontario. No one can deny the fact that today Tibet's situation is in a huge crisis. Since 1959, Tibet's condition has only ruined under the Chinese rule. The Chinese occupation of Tibet has not only stripped Tibetans of their own land, but today Tibetans are facing a huge risk of losing their own culture, their religion, their language, and their own identity. Tibetans are faced with physical and mental abuse on a daily basis. Being a human, I believe that no human, nor even an animal, should be treated so harshly that they would resort to such drastic actions as self-immolation. Seeing the rising number of self-immolations every single day, it's saddening and heart-wrenching, and it's more depressing to see the world act so cold and ignorant about our cause. Prime Minister Harper, being the leader of Canada and its people who believe in promotion of peace, democracy, freedom, and rule of law, I urge you to please speak up, to please take actions which will help ensure the well-being of Tibetan peoples inside Tibet. Prime Minister Harper, please stand up for Tibet.
Thank you.